Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us, and as Tolga said, a big thanks to Nick and the entire IMARC team for the chance to present New Century and the developments we've had to date. We often put out presentations, and I guess the front page has probably got a visual representation of how the project's been tracking, and this is easily my most exciting presentation to put together to date, because we've got our Wunma transhipper parked up next to the Golden Daisy there on the front, offloading our first shipment of zinc concentrate from the operations, from the tailings operations at the Century Zinc Mine. So it's been a very short development and a very long time coming, you might say, to get to where we are today. So it's very exciting. I'll take you through it. I'll take you through it now. So Century, we're restarting the Century operations in far northwest Queensland, ramping them back up to being a globally significant zinc producer again. Just giving you some of the history of the mine itself. Most people know about Century, discovered in 1990 by Rio Tinto, got up and running by Pasminco in around 2000, and it ran for 16 years. So Pasminco spent the best part of $2 billion on the infrastructure on the site, so all around development of the big zinc ore body there. So big zinc is 120 million tonnes at 12% zinc and lead, a huge ore body by global standard. They built as big a plant as they could, also built a concentrate slurry pipeline, a private airport with sealed runway, also a port facility and a transshipment vessel. So the mine was up and running in 2000, third largest zinc mine in the world for those 16 years. Producing about 1 million tonnes of zinc concentrate and about 100,000 tonnes of lead concentrate as well. So had 4 previous owners over the course of its history. Most people would remember Zinifex and its stellar price rise due to the zinc price. Obviously then going through into Oz Minerals. MMG acquired the bulk of the assets of Oz Minerals during the GFC, Century being one of those. And we actually started to work with MMG about the potential transaction and the potential divestment of Century. It was way back really in sort of 2013, 2014. MMG at the time had started making public disclosure about the closure of Century, and rightly so. The big zinc ore body was coming to the end of its mine life. They drew up a very large provision on their books for a 25-year rehabilitation and ultimate relinquishment of licences program. And we saw a lot of opportunity through for a couple of reasons. One was because of the inefficiencies associated with a large company having to facilitate the rehabilitation process. You know, MMG is a very large company, has a lot of overheads. Those overheads are extrapolated out over a 25-year period. It's quite a significant amount of additional cost on top of rehabilitation. So more than half of the provision was actually associated with indirect costs. So nothing actually to do with rehabilitation, just a big company managing the process. The other bit that probably got us more interested was the amount of mineralisation that was left on the site itself. So there's well known that there's 3 in situ deposits still remaining, totalling about 10 million tonnes at 10% zinc and lead. And the tailings dam itself is a huge ore body. It still has a lot of mineralisation left in it, primarily because of the commercial strategy that had been adopted over that 16-year history. So a throughput model had been adopted for that 16-year history, and rightly so. Pasminco was over $1 billion in debt. When you're that heavily in debt, what do? You focus on cash flow, as you do. So you build as big a plant as you can. It's a slow-floating ore body because the zinc-hosted sphalerite grains were quite fine grain as a result of that slow floating, but they ran the plant as hard as they could. And as a result, the average life of mine recoveries for the operations were in the low 70s. So it was not because the remaining mineralisation couldn't float, it was just never given a chance to float in that time. So as a result of that, we've been left with a beautiful ore body sitting down at the tailings dam. And you think about the money that's actually gone into that ore body. It's already mined, it's already crushed, it's already ground, sitting at surface with no strip ratio, no cut-off grade, and we mine it with a hose. So I describe it as it's a metallurgist ore body, in that you don't need to know an awful lot about geology to sort of understand the ore body itself, which is good because we're predominantly metallurgists by trade inside the company. So We worked with MMG over about a 5-year period. MMG actually did the initial proof of concept test work around tailings reprocessing. This is a very important point. In order for both companies to facilitate a mutually beneficial transaction, there had to be comfort that the process that was being proposed would work, because quite simply, you can't transfer liabilities in any state, let alone in Queensland. It can't be seen to be just handballing liabilities to companies. If we were to receive the project and the liability and it didn't work, and we would fall over, well, the liability effectively is still held with MMG, and no one wanted that. So a lot of work done in demonstrating the viability internally inside MMG, including a 10,000 tonne bulk trial of tailings through the plant, independent test work from 2 different laboratories, one in China, one in Perth. And then we went through an 18-month competitive tender process. So we became preferred bidder in December 2016, signed the transaction documents in March last year. We listed the company, which is now New Century Resources, at the end of July. And since then, we've been going through the development process. So, the New Century as a name was unknown until really August last year. But the reality is there's been a lot of work going on before then. And since then, we've implemented a very aggressive development time frame, which has enabled us to completely drill out the tailings dam to get a 100% proved ore reserve. We've raised around $90 million in equity and around $50 million in debt, and we've used that to refurbish the existing plant, get it back up into operations, and as we stand right now, we're going through the load commissioning process of the operations, but we're also producing concentrate, shipping it and selling it at the moment, which is a great result for the business as well. Just a quick overview of the zinc market. Zinc is a really interesting commodity to be in. I mean, zinc it's a bit like copper. It's everywhere, but it's nowhere. You know, it's used in almost everything. It's a $50 billion a year industry, obviously an LME traded product in there. And the realities of the zinc market are that despite relatively weak price performance of late, it's coming back up off that, and also weak equity performance in a lot of the other zinc producers. The fundamentals of zinc are very, very strong. And just as a case in point across a few slides, you can see New Century and some comparison to other developers that have some very good assets themselves. Almost all, without exception, have come off over the last 12 months in there. But it's surprising in one sense in that it doesn't reflect the fundamentals of the zinc industry at the moment. Zinc is fairly simple. You've got a situation where 50% of consumption and production is centred in China. So once you understand the dynamics of what's going on in China, the rest is relatively predictable. From a demand side, it's predominantly used in galvanising, and it very much linked to global GDP, global growth. Galvanising of steel, obviously if you're a lot of building, a lot of development going on, a lot of use of steel, you're going to be using zinc. So it has grown for over 2% for the last 10 years, and it's projected to grow 2% for the next 10 years. So outside of Trump trade wars and that sort of thing, which obviously dampened sentiment across the board, zinc is pretty standard and predictable in terms of demand. But to break that down into an actual tonnage, 2% growth in the zinc market, you're talking about nearly 300,000 tonnes of new metal demand every year. Now that's bigger than our full run rate at Century. So you're talking about a new Century every year effectively needing to come online just to cater for projected demand growth, let alone supply, let alone the dwindling supply. From a supply perspective itself, there's been a lot of talk about the sort of wall of supply that comes onto the market, is coming onto the market. It's been coming onto the market for a number of years since effectively Century came offline, Lachine closed down, Brunswick closed down, Glencore dropped a lot of tonnes out of the market from their operations as well. And some of these new projects ramping back up, people talking about this wall of supply that's available. Reality is, while we definitely see new supply coming online, you've got ourselves, we've got Gamsberg, we've got De Gould River. Outside of those 3 big mines, there really isn't a lot of supply available, a lot of credible supply available for the next 5 years. And you can see if you look at the graph there in the orange, that's outside of China, probable projects, so large-scale probable projects that are projected to come online. You can see in the dark brown there, that's actual projects inside of China. Clearly, environmental restrictions are biting in China. That's a pretty well-established story now. But when you look at those forecast probable projects that are due to come online over the next 6 years, a lot of things have to go right for those projects to get up. They're all good projects in their own right, but you're talking about permitting issues, capital raising issues, development issues, location issues. Things have to go right. And we know how hard it is to build a zinc mine when it's already built for you. Like it's bloody hard work. I'd shudder to think if we had to build the plant ourselves. But yeah, so we certainly see, naturally we're going to be bullish about zinc price, we're being zinc miners itself, but we think the fundamentals of zinc are quite strong on fairly simple supply-demand fundamentals there. And we may see that over time, that as projects keep getting pushed out, we'll see a continued strength in the zinc price for a longer period of time. Okay, getting on to the good stuff, looking at our operations itself. So we go back 15 months ago at Century, we had 8 people on the mine site, and we didn't even have a resource over the tailings dam. We listed the project at the end of July, drilled out the tailings dam, had the BFS completed, started the refurbishment process over that period of time. So, you know, we went from 8 people on the mine site, we tapped out mid this year at about 350 people. We're now down to about 140 in terms of the operations, but you think about a lot of the supporting infrastructure that we have in place as well. I think we served something like 13,000 meals on site last month. You know, there's a huge facility there just to support the team that's operating it as well. So bringing all that online was a huge challenge, and a credit to the team that we have on site, led by our COO Barry Harris as well. You'll see here, in terms of the economics, it's a very strong value proposition that was developed as part of the feasibility study. We've now done the refurbishment that was outlined inside that feasibility study associated with phase 1. So we brought half the plant back up and running, and we're going through the ramp-up process. So we can't go through to the end of next year. We'll be at our full run rate of 15 million tonnes per annum. And the real value at Century, when you start to look at the ore body or the reserves associated with the tailings dam, nothing particularly extravagant about those. 77 million tonnes, a big tonnage, 3% zinc is not particularly high grade, albeit it's not quite a traditional ore body itself, but it's really the value of the infrastructure. As I said, Pasminco spent the best part of $2 billion on it. We've been able to acquire it, get a very large project up and running in quick time for a relatively cheap capital injection. So we had our friends at Woodmac do a bit of an analysis for us of pretty much every zinc project that's been developed since 1970, and looking at the time of development, and this is from scoping all the way through to production. So it's not exploration, it's not discovery or resource drill out, it's actual scoping work through to operations themselves. Average over since 2000 has been 9 years. Of the top 10 zinc producers currently in place, 13 years. Century, literally 12 months. You know, this is the real driver here, is utilising that sunk capital that's on the site. So not just the infrastructure itself, but you also think about mining leases in place, the environmental approvals that are in place. Native title agreement took the best part of a decade to develop. You know, we're talking about man decades that were put into this project just to produce 1 tonne before the year 2000. We were able to acquire all that sunk capital. So, you know, investing $1 in Century, for us, in a new Century, the discounting associated with that dollar is obviously a lot less than any other project on the market. It's a very unique project. It's not something that comes along very often at all. So the value proposition that we apply to the Century zinc mine itself, we have an obligation to ultimately rehabilitate the site. We are fulfilling that obligation, and the way we do that is by shrinking the disturbed areas of the mine site. So we're primarily focused on the tailings dam at the moment. We utilise the evaporation dam water to hydraulically mine the tailings. We'll bring that material up through the plant. Ultimately, all of that material goes back into the pit itself. So we're obviously generating an economic return by shrinking the disturbed areas on the mine site itself. We also have 3 large waste dumps on the site. Very hard to make money out of capping waste dumps. The southern dump, MMG, it's spent about $71 million to date on rehabilitation. Southern dump has been capped and rehabilitated and signed off by the Department of Environment and Science. Western dump's about 50% done, and the northern dump hasn't been touched. So within our economic projections, we have an allocation of another $81 million towards finishing the capping of the 3 waste dumps over the tailings mine life. So you can see by the end of our tailings operations, we've effectively reduced the disturbed areas of the mine site down to a fairly negligible amount, really what sits underneath the infrastructure, which you can argue is a zero-sum game in that you would scrap and sell the infrastructure that would pay for the rehabilitation of that area. Not that we're planning on scrapping the infrastructure anytime soon. We're looking at a 7-year reserve life, established resources behind that to extend that, and also a defined phosphate mineralisation on the site, in addition to exploration upside. Just quickly, you can see the mine plan there, which we've started. We've started that hydraulic mining exercise. Some pretty pictures here of the hydro mining and going on itself. So literally slurry the material up. It flows into a sump, has 3 slurry winning pumps in it, pumps that material over a screen straight up to the plant. Very, very simple. So traditional open pit mining operation, maybe $25, $30 a tonne to mine it, crush it and grind it, get it ready for flotation. It literally costs us $2.62 to do the same thing. So very, very low cost, enables you to generate decent returns out of what is a lower grade ore body, as we don't have those traditional mining costs that you would have. Inside the processing plant itself, we're utilising one of the ball mills. We have 2 ball mills and a SAG mill on site. We're floating material through the rougher circuit, through the cleaner circuits, using the regrinds, producing concentrate, and we're pumping that up the slurry pipeline. So it is the same flow sheet. There's no black box. We're not implementing a special technology or anything like that. We're literally just effectively doubling the residence time from what was, if you go back to the traditional ore body. So putting it back through, giving it additional residence time. We produce a little bit more zinc. We don't get it all out. We only get 60% of it out, so we don't get it all, but we get what we need, so to speak, to facilitate a return for shareholders and also the rehabilitation exercise. But the port as well, port is effectively a dewatering process there, where we take that concentrate up the pipeline. It's about 20% solids. We turn that into a stockpiled material of about 10% moisture, and as I said, as of this week, we've actually started shipping material. So reclaiming it off the stockpile, we put it onto our transshipment vessel, the MV Wunmar. Wunmar's a 114 metre long, 5,000 tonne fit-for-purpose transshipment vessel. And that sends parcels of zinc out into the Gulf of Carpentaria and loads up the big export vessels. So it's the same logistics chain that ran for 16 years as the 3rd largest zinc mine in the world, producing 1 million tonnes of zinc concentrate per annum. We've refurbished it, we're restarting it, and we're ramping up operations to produce 500,000 tonnes of concentrate per annum for it. We'd love to produce more, we just don't have enough zinc, to be able to produce it. Hopefully we discover more and we ramp it up even further, but plenty of time to go. So as I said, we're ramping up to being a top 10 zinc producer, and we're also projected to be in the lowest cost quartile, which is really fundamentally the nature of the scale of the operations and also the fact that our hydraulic mining is a relatively cheap process as well. Outside of the tailings operations, which are our sole focus at the moment, we also have some in situ resources which have a PFS underway, looking at incorporating those into the mine plan to get an extension in our mine life. We have an IP program that's just finished up for the year that will be utilised for the purposes of us targeting some drilling on the mining lease. So some really interesting targets in terms of drilling available. We have identified in situ resources, as I said, 9.3 million tonnes at 10.8% zinc and lead. These are decent scale ore bodies right next to the plant. We can utilise for further feed to extend the mine life out. Give us a sort of 10-year plus scenario where we can keep exploration going and developing other resources potentially that will extend the use of the infrastructure out even further. So just as a summary, it's been a big 12 months, as a lot of people will always say, but it's certainly the case for Century, and it's a fantastic testament to the culture of the team that's developed on the site and ably supported by some of our great business partners as well. Most recently with NAB, where we've announced a $40 million debt facility through NAB. Fantastic partners for us to have through this process, and we're looking forward to growing that relationship. So if you're looking for project financing, I strongly recommend going through Nick Rees and the NAB team there. They've been great to work with. But thank you very much. I've probably got 22 seconds for questions.